Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Dr. Andrew Neville, and we're going to talk about anything and everything that is and is not adrenal fatigue, which may be way different than what you have heard about or read. Um, and what I want to do first is just check with my team to make sure the tech is okay, that I can be seen and heard on YouTube and on Facebook. Fantastic. Thank you. As you join in, please, good, we're good to go. As you join in, please let me know who you are and where you're from. I'm going to adjust that. That might be a little bit. Okay, so who you are, where you're from. We're happy to hear. I'm always curious where patients are from. We have patients from all over the country, all over the world, actually, because we got programs to be able to treat this kind of stuff so people don't have to come here to be able to get care. Adrenal fatigue is one of the most misunderstood, confusing conditions that's out there. So it's a bit of a challenge, right? It's a bit of a challenge, and that's what we're here to do is try to dispel um, any myths, any mysteries, try to tackle what adrenal fatigue is and what it is not, and because there's more to it. So I've got a list of questions, and some questions are left over from last time. I try to get through them all, but other questions are from some patients that are in one of my core programs. So they get kind of top billing. But by all means, if you're live and you have questions and concerns, share your information with us. Give me that question. We will try to do everything we can to get to those questions for sure. And if you're brand new to adrenal fatigue and you heard about it or whatever, you're like, I have anxiety. Somebody said it could be adrenal fatigue. Is that a thing? Is that real? My doctor says it's not really a thing, right? What's all that about? So if you're brand new to this, I would suggest you go to my YouTube channel and look at the rest of the videos on that, especially my mini course. In my mini course, I really kind of dive into what adrenal fatigue actually is because it's way more than what you might have been told by both conventional and alternative medicine. So, for those of you who are just joining in, let us know where you're from. We're always curious. If you have any questions, just throw them out at us. I've got my team is amazing. They'll be handling those questions on the fly. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Right. So, Anita says, is retraining the limbic nervous system key for healing the overall emotional and physical aspects of adrenal fatigue? Yes, Anita, and no. So, for you and for everybody else, what adrenal fatigue is ultimately is a stress response system dysfunction. Your stress response includes your adrenals, of course. They produce that end organ, cortisol, adrenaline, fight the tiger, deal with traffic, your boss, your whatever, right? So that's cortisol and adrenaline, but there's more to it, right? So there's other hormones, there's glands in the system that tell the adrenals what to do, your hypothalamus, your pituitary, which are two master endocrine glands. They're in your brain, they control your adrenals. That's the hormone side of your stress response system. But then there's this nerve side of your stress response, which is called your autonomic nervous system. And you can think of autonomic as automatic, where it's basically the part of your nervous system that controls your organs. And they work together, right? This hormone side and the nerve side, they work together to generate stress physiology or not. But I tease them apart because treatment can be a little different. Neither of those two parts of that system actually call the shots. So the CEO, if you will, of your stress response is a step above that hypothalamus. There's this deep central part of the brain called the limbic system, which Anita referred to. The limbic system, there's a few different little organelles and organs in there, or parts, the hippocampus and the amygdala, which we might have heard of. The insula is another kind of major player, a little less famous, all working together. Not a thinking part of our brain, it's just a reacting part of our brain. Control some basic functions, first and foremost, involved in temperature regulation, sleep-wake cycles, a few other things, but its main job is to constantly be assessing your environment for danger. So it's always assessing your external environment, receiving information from senses and perception. It's assessing your internal environment, receiving information from chemicals in the blood supply. When it receives that information, it's just got to react. Is this stimulus harmful, dangerous? Can this thing kill me? Do I got to jump this body into fight or flight, right? Hormones and adrenals, hormones, nerves. Or is it the opposite? It's harmless, innocuous. I can just chill out in vacation mode and just let it pass. What happens is with a genetic predisposition of some kind, and then enough chronic stress over time to overwhelm those genetics, that limbic system starts to get trigger happy, starts to over-perceive its environment as dangerous, and our body starts to get stuck in stress physiology. So Anita says, is the limbic system treatment, rebalancing, healing the key? Yes and no. You got to treat all of it. The most effective way to get after this, adrenal fatigue thing, which is really a broken stress response system, is to treat all of those things at the same time. You'll have doctors, bright doctors, right? They'll say, oh, you have dysautonomia, which is an imbalance or dysfunction in your autonomic nervous system. And I'm like, yeah, you do, but not only. Or somebody will say, well, you have a problem with your adrenals. Look, we did a test and yeah, you do, but not only. And others will take pictures of the brain, right? Here's your MRI of your brain. Look what lights up, right? Your hippocampus is lighting up. That means, your limbic system is a major. Yeah, you do, but not only. The key is to treat all of these systems, these parts of your stress response system, all at the same time. And that's when you can finally get ahead of this, right? Finally kind of dial back the damage that comes from stress physiology and increase that rest and digest physiology, which is where we heal and repair. So that's why our program is targeted for each and every one of these things. So it's a little more complex than you think, right? And that's why our program is a little more well-rounded and comprehensive. Okay, how's that for a short, quick answer, team? I will get yelled at during this hour. I will get yelled at by my team for not cutting to the chase. So Gina says, will I need to take Serophos for the rest of my life to get adequate sleep? Is there any long-term benefits or side effects? Gina, okay, so Serophos is a supplement or a remedy, couple different phospholipids in there that we will use at times to help quiet or calm the HPA axis. Kind of works in the hypothalamic and the pituitary area where, when they studied it, if they were to stress a population out, and you would expect a 10-fold increase in stress hormone, if you use this Serophos, they'd only bump up like 5 times, right? So it dampens that stress response, which is helpful. Long-term benefits, of course, there's long-term benefits when you quiet and heal, and that's what it's doing. It's working on healing and calming the hypothalamus pituitary, kind of quieting that trigger-happy system. So there's your long-term benefit, right? So you're not so easily triggered. Any side effects? No. I haven't seen any side effects. Depends on the need, depends on the patient. Use it. Now, your question was, should you need to take this for the rest of your life? Absolutely not. If you need something for the rest of your life, it means we're not fixing the underlying problem, right? Like I have patients come into me and they're like, well, my doctor says it's candida. Like that's my problem, right? Which is intestinal yeast, overgrowth, dysbiosis, or whatever, right? So I have to do candida cleanses, 2 or 3 times a year to get at it. And I'm like, well, if candida is the problem and you kill candida, shouldn't you be better and stay better? Right. So, and if not, and you have to keep doing these candida cleanses, then maybe there's something underlying that's allowing the candida to develop and flourish that's not being fixed. Right. Because you can sell a whole lot of detoxes and candida stuff if you don't fix that underlying problem. Right. So that underlying problem is fixing that. And once we fix this, dial it back, calm it down, like Anita asked, fix the limbic system, fix the HPA axis, the autonomic nervous system, get back into balance, you shouldn't need the Serophos anymore. It takes time, And it takes kind of a comprehensive approach, but absolutely should happen. Okay, Kim says, what role do the adrenals play in neurotransmitters and depression? It's a good question, Kim. I just had this conversation with a group of patients where we do these group calls sometimes, and we were talking about this very thing. So, stress physiology is basically, think of it as adrenaline, right? We all know what adrenaline feels like, which is essentially like you putting your foot to the floor on the accelerator in this body car that you have, right? It pedal to the metal, right? Adrenaline, it's like bam. Well, the body tries to hit the brakes, right? Because it knows that if your foot to the floor all the time, like that's a problem, that's dangerous. There's going to be wear and tear on that system. The way it tries to hit the brakes is with some of the main calming neurotransmitters, serotonin, GABA, dopamine, to try to slow this thing down, to try to calm it. Except nothing trumps your stress response, right? Adrenaline is uncomfortable. It's life-saving and amazing, but it's uncomfortable, right? Anxiety, palpitations, sweats, you know what it feels like, right? If we could electively kind of turn that off with our body, we probably all would have died out thousands of years ago, right? So nothing trumps the stress response. So what happens is the brakes fail. So your foot's to the floor. So what we pay attention to much more so is get your foot off the accelerator. Get your foot off that accelerator. Now what happens? So, and I used to run neurotransmitter tests, urine neurotransmitter tests, which I don't do anymore because the patterns were always the same. Initially with stress, those serotonin they go up to try to hit the brakes on the accelerator, but eventually they fail because nothing trumps the stress response, and then those go low, which happens to be why some of the best-selling medications for this and what my patients all come to me on is all these SSRIs or antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, dopamine agonists, all this stuff. So the big thing that we want to do is get your foot off the accelerator, right? Now, so you're asking about depression, and then there's this question, does serotonin deficiency cause depression, right? And that's a really big controversy and too much for us to kind of get into now, because yes, it's connected, but is it causal or correlation? We're not really sure yet, right? So we're still trying to work that stuff out, because we also know that when they study rats and they study stress physiology, if you put a rat in a physiology model of what they call chronic unpredictable mild stress, and that's what they do. We want to study what stress does to a rat, chronic unpredictable mild stress, whatever that may be. They put them in that model. That rat will develop depression or behaviors that we link with depression, like less food seeking and mate seeking and things like that, all this depressive affect. We hear about depression in our society today and we think, oh, that's a psychological problem, right? Well, I'm pretty sure that is not a psychological problem for that rat. It's just that you stressed them out, you dumped a bunch of stress hormone in the brain that caused, through a variety of pathways, including some neurotransmitter problems, that caused this affect of depression, but also anxiety and all that stuff. So is it connected? 100% it's connected. And I would suggest that the adrenal problems, which is a stress response system dysfunction, is at the causal level. Okay, so Ronnie says, I'm really struggling with depression. There you go. So I'm really struggling with depression the last 2 to 3 weeks. Feel like I've had a major setback. I'm in a dark place, feeling stuck. At what point would you prescribe an antidepressant to help get over this hurdle? So I'm sorry to hear that you're in that space. Healing from, this thing we call adrenal fatigue is tough, right? It's hard. Part of the depression, right, comes from, part of it's fatigue, right? Part of it's just brain fatigue. So we get exhausted, right? When we're fighting tigers all the time, we damage our mitochondria. We can't produce energy, ATP in the cells, and that ATP is needed for everything, including thinking and processing and all that stuff, right? So some of what we feel as depression is just flat out fatigue. Some of it is damage, right, from stress physiology. Some of it is psychological, because this condition, frankly, stinks. Having been there through it myself. Like it's hard, right? Because we can't live the life we want to live, right? We can't be the parent we want to be. We can't be the partner we want to be. We can't do the things we love anymore, right? So it does become depressing and frustrating. I mean, there's all kinds of things that are there. Now, most of my patients are treated through conventional medicine in very much the same way. They're put on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds because that's all they know to do, right? Because when you've got somebody who's in stress physiology too often, it causes some wear and tear, that stress hormone. It'll save your life if you use it once in a while, which you have to do, but turn it on all the time and it causes all this damage. And it's that wear and tear leads to the symptoms: fatigue, pain, weight, up or down, mostly up, sometimes down, brain fog, insomnia, anxiety, depression, and some blood sugar, some blood pressure problems. I mean, I just described a whole heck of a lot of people. So you go to your doctor with some of these symptoms. Doc, I can't sleep. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I'm gaining weight and all this stuff. What do they might know that stress physiology is connected to this, and I think they probably do, but they don't know what to do with that, right? So they're going to give you medications, right? Here, take this for your depression, take this for your anxiety, take this for your sleep. And I mean, if you're lucky enough to pick the right drug, which is not that easy, right? A lot of you know that, right? It's not that easy. But if you're lucky enough to pick the right drug, you might cover up the symptom, but you haven't fixed this underlying problem, right? And that damage kind of persists over time. So when we use meds, and I'm not against using medications for this, but when you use meds alone, it's kind of like putting a little piece of tape over the check engine light in your car, which isn't going to make anything better, and ultimately it gets worse. Once I get a patient in front of me, in general, I do not have to add medication to that person, right? In general. Because we're doing all these other various things. The key is to pay attention, right? If there's patterns, Ronnie, you want to pay attention. Okay, well, why am I more depressed now over these past 2 to 3 weeks where I wasn't so bad, a month ago, 6 weeks ago? What is different? One of the common things for my patients, right, probably the most common thing, is that when we feel better, we do more, and ultimately we do too much, and then we dip. Because again, there's an energy deficit, right? Stress physiology is like a zebra running from lions all the time. That zebra is going to be dog tired, right? It uses a ton of energy being in stress physiology. Okay, so we do all these things to shift that physiology. Let's get some fuel back. Okay, I'm feeling a little better. I'm recovering a little bit. And then inherently we feel better, and it's who we are as humans. It's who we are as people who develop adrenal problems. We tend to overdo, and then we crash, and then we're like, oh, right? And all those crashes, and this is one of the hardest parts about healing from this, that nobody really understands, right? Whether it's doctors, practitioners, patients too. We get these crashes or these dips, and those dips feel like it felt right in the very beginning. It all feels the same. But functionally, you're a little higher, right? And it's not like you have to start over again. You haven't undone everything. But it's like, okay, we got a taste of feeling good, and then that felt good. And then, oh, now, am I back at the beginning? We challenge, our limbic system worries and thinks maybe it's something else. Like maybe, it's not something else. Stick to the basics, go back to the beginning, right? And invariably, that system will kind of kick back in again. It comes. It's a process. It's up and down, just the way it is. Okay. Okay. So Catherine says, I'm ignoring that message that they're yelling at me to speed up. Catherine says, I realized that I've had this since I was a child because I have had the second wind as long as I can remember. What caused me to react this way all my life? Yeah, Catherine, you're probably right. That second wind it's always a bad thing, right? Your adrenals give you this nice dump of energy in the morning, and then it gradually goes down. And if it goes down too low and your day isn't finished, you'll get another dump of energy. Like the adrenals are like, okay, here's a bunch more cortisol, right? Which then we get this second wind that makes it harder to wind down at night and all that stuff. But what that means is you're borrowing that energy from today. You're borrowing that energy from tomorrow to pay for today. And that only lasts so long. So why did it happen and start so long ago? I mean, for most of us, this condition starts in utero. In utero, we have plenty of research now that shows that you could look at the stress of a woman as she's carrying a child, and you could predict the stress-related illness that child will have in adulthood, right? Because there's a shared circulation, right? It's how baby gets nutrients, right? But if mom is stressed and her adrenals aren't up to snuff, she's going to borrow that stress hormone from the baby. Baby's going to be happy to give mom that stress hormone because if mom doesn't make it, I'm not going to make it, right? But during that 6 to 9 months when that happens, that baby's stress response system is like a pump that gets primed. Now that baby's born, right? And it's cranking out stress hormone. It's really good at it to give to mom, but now mom's not there to take it away. And that baby will usually be irritable, colicky, may not sleep very well, right? And now mom has this new baby, which is not a stress-free situation either, but doesn't have that extra stress hormone from the baby. Moms often take a dip. And in this country, that gets bad enough. We call that postpartum depression. So for many of us, it's a bit of that predisposition from very early on at a young age, coupled with, enough stress over time, which comes from all various angles. Doesn't matter how long it's been going on, Catherine, you can absolutely fix this. You can absolutely fix it. You just have to hit it in a comprehensive way. Again, you can't just take a couple supplements for your adrenals and fix all that I've just described, but you absolutely can fix it, right? And if you're curious or if you want kind of more specific guidance, I mean, I've got a couple different programs that I'll use to fix this directly. This is all we do. You can reach out, right? Just reach out to us. My team, even in the comments, my team will post kind of a message because I've got patient coordinators who will talk to you about this and talk to you about options, complimentary call if you're interested, or at least they can give you links to get some more information. So, okay. Cesar says, what do you think about paleo ketogenic diet? Some people say it is number one must to heal. So from this perspective, from our perspective, and hello, Cesar, from our perspective with regard to the adrenals, the absolute must to heal from a dietary standpoint is a hypoglycemic diet. Small, frequent meals, more protein and fat, low sugar and carb, prevent that blood sugar from dropping, which is a stress on your adrenals every time that happens. Now, can you do that with keto? Sure. Can you do it with paleo? 100%. You could do it with a vegan diet if you want, a little harder, but you can. The big thing you have to worry about with keto is that the keto population, this kind of fad, also talks about intermittent fasting. And that is an absolute no for somebody who has adrenal problems, because intermittent fasting is basically you're shortening the feeding time for a window within 4 to 8 hours or so. Every hour you don't eat something, you're stressing your adrenals. Your adrenals have to keep your stress physiology going to keep your sugar up so you don't dip into a hypoglycemic coma. So intermittent fasting is an absolute no for people with adrenal problems. I don't mind it. If your physiology is balanced and you don't have a problem with it, then there are lots of benefits to controlling that feeding window, but not for somebody with adrenal problems. So yeah, most of my patients don't have to go keto. And I mean, I think everybody knows what keto and paleo are these days. If not, just kind of Google that stuff. There's plenty of information out there, but inherently paleo and keto have more protein and fat, lower sugar and carb. You just want to eat frequently enough, and absolutely. All right, not essential, but those diets do balance the blood sugar, which is key. Okay, Carol Louise says, I am in recovery mode and did your program a couple of years ago, okay? Just started drinking coffee in the morning to get some energy up. Oh, but instead it makes me tired. Should I not be using caffeine? So, Carol, if you're here's the problem. I actually don't pull people off of coffee or caffeine unless it makes them feel uncomfortable in some certain way. What I'm much more concerned about is really the problem with the need for the caffeine, right? So if you need caffeine and the energy from caffeine or any stimulant for that matter, sugar, right, or Monster drinks or Red Bull, whatever, right, all these stimulant drinks. If you need to get that extra fuel from a substance, it means your life is outpacing your capacity to live it. And that is what's going to give you a problem. That's going to be trouble. Okay. Because now you're going to be borrowing energy, right? That energy is not coming from you. You're just being jacked up by some kind of a stimulant. So what I would do is go back to the basics. And Carol, if you've been through this with us before, dust everything off, right? It is very, very common for patients to be very motivated when they get in front of me because they're really uncomfortable. Pain and discomfort motivates people, right? So they'll do just about anything when they come in front of me. I'm like, stand on your head and eat peanut butter or whatever. They're like, okay, sure. Like they'll do anything, right? So then we do it all. We start to get better. We're in recovery mode, ups and downs, of course, which happens with everybody. And then as we feel better, we kind of let out the reins a little bit. Maybe I don't do my relaxation exercise as well. Maybe I'm not as focused on triggering my vagus nerve, or I'm not eating quite the hypoglycemic diet. I back off from the salt and all that stuff, right? Or some of the supplementation or whatever. And supplements you shouldn't need forever, but if that's going on, the issue is what we have to do now is tighten the reins back up, right? So if you go back to all that stuff and kind of pick at that, chances are some of those things have kind of fallen by the wayside. Go back to them, and what worked to get you back on your feet in the past will work again to get you back on your feet. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us again. Okay. Let's see. Oh, I don't know. My crew is trying to talk to me, but I can't read that. I can only do one thing at a time. Jude says, can macular degeneration be related to adrenal insufficiency? I mean, macular degeneration is an age-related eye disease. Aging in general is strongly associated with adrenal problems. They're almost the same physiologic process of oxidative stress, of damage, right? Oxidative stress. So let me go back. With stress physiology, right? No matter what it is, right? You could be in traffic, you could be, argument with your boss or partner. You could have a virus. You could anything, right? That puts us into stress physiology. It's going to cause metabolic exhaust, and the metabolic exhaust from stress physiology is oxidative stress free radicals. Those free radicals cause damage in the body. They're in the blood. And because the blood goes everywhere, this damage is literally everywhere, head to toe, inside and out, including the eyes. Sure. Everywhere. You Google oxidative stress and macular degeneration. Interestingly, a lot of the stuff they use, right, the nutrients they use to help with macular, they're mostly antioxidants, right? So is there a direct connection? No. But stress physiology over time will cause wear and tear all throughout the body, including the eyes. When you shift this physiology, right, meaning take somebody out of stress physiology, which means they're going back into rest and digest physiology, you're decreasing the wear and tear in the body, you're turning on the healing and repair. You now have the opportunity to heal from anything, literally. I mean, I pay attention to treating this basic physiology, right? But I'm every day I'm amazed where patients come in. You know what? That chronic, I don't know, skin rash I had, it's actually going away. It's gone. Right? I had a woman that she had something else going on. She had to catheterize herself to go to the bathroom, so she would catheterize herself probably 90% of the time, not always. And she's like, doc, I don't have to catheterize myself very much anymore. And I'm like, really? Okay, well, we weren't doing anything for that. But what we were doing was shifting this physiology which turns on the body's ability to heal and repair. I mean, it's incredibly powerful, incredibly powerful. Okay, so I'm not sure what that next question means. If somebody can jump on that. So Trisha says, what test should my doctor run to indicate adrenal deficiency? All right, that's a great question. Depending on who your doctor is, they may or may not believe adrenal fatigue exists. Conventional doctors are taught that to have an adrenal problem, you have to pretty much have adrenal failure, which is something called Addison's disease. It's very rare, does happen, complete adrenal failure. Just north of that is something called adrenal insufficiency, which is just a slightly milder version of this adrenal failure. But if they can rule out any of that, then they're going to say, you don't have an adrenal problem, right? Those are, again, both incredibly rare. Now, if I think about that logically, it doesn't make sense, right? Because these same doctors, they'll let you have a thyroid hormone problem short of complete failure. They'll let you have an ovarian hormone problem short of complete failure, but not your adrenals. If your adrenals haven't completely failed, then they're doing perfect. It's great. Well, nothing could be farther from the truth, but that's what they're taught. So what they're going to do is they're going to do a cortisol test. They're going to do a blood cortisol test, which is inefficient. The range is incredibly broad. You will pass that blood cortisol test. If you're persistent, they may do a stim test, right? Give a fake pituitary hormone to trigger the adrenals, to try to prod them and poke them. And of course, all my patients pass that test as well. Those are not good tests for this adrenal fatigue problem. Okay, so let's say you move from conventional medicine to alternative medicine, and they do the right testing, which is a saliva test. So you want to do a 4-point saliva test. I kind of enamored with this one lab that has been doing it the longest. I find it to be the most accurate and comprehensive test. But again, saliva test, cortisols, DHEA, some other hormones. That is the best way to assess for the adrenals. But you also have to get that testing interpreted the right way. And there are some nuances in all these various tests. I have seen numerous times tests come into me and they're like, oh yeah, I had this test 2 years ago. I'm like, well, you had adrenal fatigue back then. They're like, oh, my doctor didn't say they said it was normal. So I look at it, and you got to have to read between the lines a little bit, but you can absolutely find out and see some patterns of dysfunction, especially with DHEA. DHEA, Tricia, is one of the key ones, because as the DHEA is really a tell, DHEA is another adrenal hormone, goes up with stress, and then it goes down with stress over time. And DHEA is also an age-related thing. So some people, their DHEA is like barely normal, but they're like 30 years old. Well, your DHEA should be high normal. If your DHEA is barely normal, you have a DHEA of like a 75-year-old woman. Like, that's a problem. And there's some other stuff going on. So saliva testing. Last thing I'll say about that, I know, long-winded, but the adrenals are only part of this entire stress response system dysfunction, right? So yes, we have to test the adrenals. It's the main thing we can test, but we have to look at it in context of the rest of this system as well, which we kind of glean by symptoms and things like that. Okay, I know you're yelling at me to speed up, but you keep adding questions. So this is not all my fault. Brianna says, I suspect I have AFS because no one has an answer for my sudden continued weight gain, specifically in the stomach area. That's all cortisol, blood sugar issues, cortisol, and PCOS, adrenal. My blood tests reveal high level of inflammation as well. Cortisol. Cortisol is your main anti-inflammatory, Brianna. So yeah, I mean, if you have a problem with cortisol, you're going to have a problem with inflammation. What supplements can I take to begin to address AFS, adrenal fatigue syndrome? I don't use that terminology, but some people do. So the first thing, Brianna, is to know is that supplements don't fix adrenal problems. They don't. Now, you have lots of people trying to sell you lots of supplements to fix this stuff, but they don't. And it's not that I don't use supplements in my practice. I do use certain supplements in my practice. But what we have to remember is they are supplementary to a bunch of other work, right? A bunch of other kind of lifestyle, dietary modification, finding balance, and some interesting conversations that we have to have. You need a comprehensive protocol to get ahead of what you're dealing with. I mean, yes, vitamin C, and yes, some omega-3s, and yes, like there are some things that you can take, um, but supplements alone aren't going to fix this. Okay. So you absolutely have adrenal fatigue. If you need, I mean, so a couple different things you can do. Go to my YouTube channel, educate yourself. I think I've done a video on PCOS directly where I kind of explain some of the interconnectedness, right? Get some information, right? Get testing. If you want specific help from, somebody who's done this for over 20 years, who kind of knows some of the ins and outs with this, you can always reach out to us. I've got a couple different programs that I run with coaches, without coaches, that can help people to kind of get ahead of this, because you need help, you need guidance, you need support, right? I mean, that's what it takes basically to heal from this condition. So we're happy to help. Just reach out to us in the comments here. But yes, what you're describing is adrenal fatigue. Catherine says, is this connected to being diagnosed with pernicious anemia at 10, Hashimoto's at 05, celiac at 15? Possibly pernicious anemia has to do with B12 and potentially stomach acid levels, things like that, which can get suppressed by the adrenals. Hashimoto's an autoimmune thyroid problem, the most common cause of hypothyroidism. When you're in stress physiology suppresses immune, digestive, reproductive, thyroid, suppress the immune and the thyroid together, sets us up for Hashimoto's. Okay. So number one, I've never had somebody with Hashimoto's who didn't have an underlying adrenal problem. I'll leave it at that. And celiac disease, again, suppressed immune, digestive. We'll stop there. Suppress the immune, digestive system. You've got food allergies. So the why, right? There's a why. Like, why do I have celiac disease? Why is my body reacting to gluten? Like, it's not evil. It's not dangerous. It's not a pathogen, right? It's because of what the immune system does when it's hit with a bunch of stress hormone. We develop food allergies. I see them in all my patients. So I would suggest the underlying cause of all those things is going to be this stress physiology over time. Christine. Just had an MRI. I have a small growth in my pituitary. Wanted to know if that can affect the adrenals. Yeah. So the pituitary tell the adrenals what to do. So the pituitary controls your adrenals, your thyroid, your ovaries. Just because you have a small growth doesn't necessarily mean it does, right? You should go to an endocrinologist, get tested for all these various hormones, because the pituitary mass can be hormone secreting, which then tells the adrenals, thyroid, and ovaries what to do, or it cannot, right? It can just be a mess. But you can figure out kind of what happens. Like there's something called a prolactinoma, right? So the pituitary produces prolactin. That's a mass in your pituitary that just dumps out a bunch of prolactin. Well, you can test for all that stuff, and any endocrinologist should be able to. But if you go back and look at the signs and symptoms of adrenal fatigue, so we've got on our website, I've got a functional and assessment tool, right, to think about adrenal fatigue and what it looks like and all that stuff. If you kind of answer those questions, takes 4 or 5 minutes, it'll spurt out the likelihood of you dealing with adrenal fatigue or something else, and then give you some information and guidance. But the safe answer is it's possible it could, or it may have nothing to do with it. Yeah. Okay. Vishal says, is red light therapy beneficial for adrenal fatigue for stage 1? Okay. So everybody stages this thing differently. I don't use stage 1. It's kind of in general, early, middle, late stage for me. That's probably it. Red light therapy is something that is a bit of a fad that a lot of people are kind of jumping onto. It's not a bad thing. I don't think it's going to hurt. It's fine if, somebody's selling you a red light device. you want to be somewhat cautious and dubious, or if some practitioner says, "Oh, this red light therapy that you have to do 3 times a week for 6 weeks will help," I mean, I'd question that a little bit. Not that it's not going to help, but red light therapy alone is not going to fix what I've just described. I don't know how long you've been on the call, Vishal, but go back to the previous stuff, because this is a problem, right? With multiple systems: the endocrine system, neurological system, right? Autonomic nervous system, central nervous system, and then all the subsequent mitochondrial damage, GI tract damage, immune system imbalance. I mean, this is a body-wide thing. So some red lights here and there is not necessarily going to fix all of that. Can it be one, I would suggest, adjunctive tool in combination with a bunch of other stuff? Maybe. Right? Maybe it's a piece of the puzzle, but there are plenty of central pieces of the puzzle that are far more important than that. That's what you have to focus on. Okay, Anita says, what indicators to look for that tell me when to stop supplementing with salt? Okay, so one of the main hormones in the adrenals helps us to hold on to salt. It's called aldosterone, similar to cortisol, a little different. Helps us hold on to salt. In adrenal fatigue, that generally doesn't happen. And in the body, water follows salt, right? It's osmosis, basically. So if you can't hold on to salt, you can't hold on to water. That's why my patients will urinate more frequently than the average person. That can also compromise blood volume. So at times patients will get lightheaded, right? Dizzy, wobbly, that kind of stuff. Low blood pressure sometimes. What it really means is you're chronically dehydrated. Not just superficially, but at a cellular level. When cells are dehydrated, they just don't work. Absolutely inefficient, like an engine without enough oil in that engine, right? So we have to rehydrate people from the inside out, and until the adrenals get to do that job or are able to do that job, you want to do it by increasing your salt, taking in more salt. So how much salt? It varies, right? It really does vary. We want to pay attention to those symptoms. The testing can kind of guide us as well. And I'm impressed by how much salt some of my patients ultimately need over time, because it keeps helping them as they increase, it keeps helping them and helping them. And then we need to maintain that for a period of time long enough for this whole stress response system, and including the adrenals, to heal, recover. Aldosterone picks back up. Now aldosterone can do that job and help you to hold on to salt. So certainly at a minimum, I would say if there's any frequent urination, lightheadedness still, you're going to need more salt. I would also suggest probably for years, you're going to have this tendency to need a little more salt over time. So, you want to pay, you're going to have to pay some attention to those things. If you oversalt, it might make you a little nauseous, especially if you take too much in at any one time. It could make you swell. We think about that all the time, right? Well, if I increase the salt, I'm going to swell. Well, not necessarily. You can swell because your salt is too low as well. And by swelling, I mean, like my rings don't fit quite as well, or I have these lines where my socks were when I take my socks off at the end of the day. If that starts happening, then maybe your salt is a little too high. Sometimes, rarely, but that might happen in the beginning, which just means, okay, we're going a little too much too fast, so let's just slow down on that, right? We have to listen to your body. So that's where you're at with the salt needed. Okay. Joe says, can muscle fatigue and weakness get worse if you're doing everything as recommended? I'm getting back into jiu-jitsu, just worried I'm causing more harm because of weak muscles. I think I'm overthinking everything now. I think you probably are overthinking a little bit, Joe. The key here is to listen to your body. If exercise is a stress, it's a good stress on the body, and I want all my patients to exercise or move as much as they can, just not more. So I want to be cautious with exercise. That said, I want people to exercise, and you can exercise. At the beginning of this condition, I generally pull back exercise, and the hard part is knowing, all right, how much can I do? What can I get away with? Especially because It's like putting, if you put me on a volleyball court, my brain still thinks I'm 25 years old and will try to tell my body to do things I used to be able to do when I was 25 years old. And then my body quickly realizes, you're not 25 years old anymore. And yeah, bad things can happen. So the same thing happens with us, right? We go back to like, okay, I'm going to train again. And then all of a sudden we kind of think we may be better than we are. So you always want to go slowly, right? You always want to hold back, right? But listen to your body. If you over exercise, right? If you over exercise, you'll feel it, right? You'll pay for it with increased muscle fatigue, or even, systemic fatigue, in a way that's different than like a delayed onset muscle soreness or something like that. Weak muscles get stronger because we put some stress on those weak muscles, and then they break down, they build back stronger, things like that. Exercise is probably fine given your energy level and your capacity. Just listen to your body. As long as you're introducing exercise in these intervals, not overdoing it, not paying for it, then you're doing fine. Be careful with the intensity of training. Be careful with the frequency of training and the duration of training, right? Keep it moderate, and just listen to your body. Okay, so we've got 15 minutes to go, I'm told. Okay, so Karen says, do EMFs, electromagnetic field, aggravate the adrenals? They can. So part of our stress physiology involves the limbic system and our senses interpreting our environment. And with stress over time, that sensitivity starts to increase. They call that sensitization. So a lot of my patients will come into me and they're sensitive to their surroundings. They're like, Doc, I'm kind of sensitive to these bright lights and these loud sounds and harsh chemicals and smells, even touch. Like you could touch one of my patients and their brain registers that as pain, which is actually a big, strong part of fibromyalgia kind of pain, right? Which they don't, conventional medicine doesn't really know what that is either. That sensitization can even go as far as people being sensitized in the other senses. And we do have other senses in our body, like even barometric pressure change will affect my patients. Like they'll feel worse, right? But EMFs as well, right? EMFs are wavelengths and signals and things like that, and they go through us all the time. I definitely have patients who are on the more sensitive side, who feel this stuff, right? They'll feel computers and devices and, the power supplies and things like that. If you're one of those people, then you want to work on avoidance, or at least minimizing that effect on the system until it becomes less sensitive, and it should. Dr. Posnecker, who did this before me, used to say, if you had to describe somebody with adrenal fatigue, right, and you could only use one word, he said that word would have to be sensitive. And I find that to be true, right? We are sensitive on so many different levels, certainly with the senses, and we're also a little more caring. We tend to care a little too much even, and we tend to be doers, and we tend to care about what we do. So we do things well, and then people come to us because we do things well, and then that feels good, and we do more things well. We can overdo and all that stuff. So anyway, sometimes sensitive to like the nth degree. So while we don't have to accept that as the new norm, we have to acknowledge that that's where you are now. Be cautious, try to minimize that, that exposure, with the expectation that that can improve over time. So yeah, there is a connection. There's a connection. Okay, let's see. Okay, so I'll read that. Okay, so we had a YouTube poll. So I want to thank those of you that participated in the poll on YouTube. And we got the most votes about how thyroid health is related to the adrenals. So I want to talk a little bit about that. The thyroid and the adrenals work together. Back in school, as a naturopathic medical student, I used to think, when I'm learning about all these hormones, I used to think that the adrenals, the thyroid, and the ovaries, and they're your kind of three most common kind of external endocrine organs. I used to think of them as like a three-legged stool, right? They all work together. We know they all talk to one another. This raises that and this lowers that and all that stuff, right? They're all connected. Three-legged stool. But once I got out into the real world and started doing what I do, I realized that that's a bad metaphor, right? The adrenals call the shots. The adrenal function and the adrenal status or state dictates what happens with the thyroid and what happens with the ovaries. That's it. Full stop. And doctors will try to tell you otherwise. Full stop. Because if we just go back to the research, right? We know that stress physiology, right, when you release extra stress hormone, that cortisol will go to the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid hormone axis and suppress it at every level it possibly can. Stop the hypothalamus from triggering the pituitary. Stop the pituitary from triggering the thyroid. Stop the thyroid from producing thyroid hormone. It even goes so far as to convince the thyroid to release an inactive form of thyroid hormone that we call reverse T3. Release this inactive form of thyroid hormone just in case we miss suppressing thyroid hormone production anywhere else. Make this inactive stuff to bind up receptors to really slow this thing down. We know this. Now, the same thing will happen with reproductive hormones in the ovaries. We know that stress physiology will suppress the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian hormone axis. And it makes sense too, right? Who cares about your periods or erections in guys or libido or sex life? Like, we don't want you to procreate right now. Like, there must be a tiger in front of you if you're needing all this cortisol. So let's suppress all that stuff. That makes sense to me. Suppress the ovaries. Suppressing the thyroid did not make sense, right? Because so theoretically there's a tiger in front of us. Why would we suppress the thyroid, which is kind of like the engine of your body, right? Gets us going. But I believe in the wisdom of the body, so there must be a purpose. So I came up with this analogy that if the thyroid is like the engine, the adrenals must be like the oil and gas. And when you're overusing the oil and gas, right, stress physiology, the body purposely slows down the engine so it doesn't burn out. And I've seen that play out in 20 some years of doing this, where a well-intentioned practitioner would say, hey, your thyroid's a little off. Of course you're tired. Of course you can't. You're depressed and you're gaining weight or whatever. Here's some thyroid hormone and people feel better. Temporarily, you're cranking up their engine, but they don't give any attention to the oil and gas, so they feel better temporarily. Could be a couple months, could be a couple years, and then they crash worse. And I've also seen that patients come into me, we happen to know this stuff. We're like, okay, your thyroid's a little off, that's fine, but let's just try to stop suppressing it and see what happens. And all of a sudden, those people don't need thyroid hormone, or if they're on thyroid hormone, now they need to reduce their thyroid hormone intake as well. So very strong connection. You can't affect even, I'd say, one without the other, but the adrenals come first. Don't let anybody tell you anything different. Okay? All right. Now I got a couple more in-depth questions in 5 minutes. Okay, so Jess says, hi, Dr. Neville. I don't have low cortisol any longer, but I have dehydration and weight loss after I started IVs, but it keeps happening. Had COVID, biocide and bentonite clay, biotoxins, mycotoxins, protocols, losing weight. Is this endocrine? Yeah. Nephrologist said no problem. This is endocrine. 10 doctors can't figure it out. Diabetes insipidus. Well, diabetes insipidus is an easy thing to test for. They'll rule that out in a second. Endocrinologist prescribed Florinef. Okay, so Florinef is aldosterone, right? Which is that adrenal hormone that helps you hold on to salt. Mm-hmm. So if your endocrinologist is prescribing an adrenal hormone, you have adrenal problems. They just don't know the breadth of what they're dealing with, but that's what's going on. Bunch of other testing, dysbiosis, food sensitivities, diabetes. So I was so involved with charity Peloton weight training, so probably overtraining is my guess. Eat clean, healthy blood. Okay, so insomnia, anxiety, hypothyroid, constipation. Okay, so you got to stop chasing after all this extraneous stuff. Like what all these doctors are doing, Jess, is they're having you chase after secondary and tertiary problems that are a result of your physiology being stuck in stress physiology. That is what you have to fix. Your history is complex. There's a lot going on. My strong recommendation would be to reach out to us and talk to one of my patient coordinators. This is something we do very well. The vast majority of practitioners will not understand how to get around this. They're going to be chasing after these various red herrings, and you'll be doing that for years while you kind of lose traction, right? Chasing after all that extra stuff wastes precious energy, time, and of course, money. I would strongly recommend you reach out to us. I mean, that's where I've got to leave you. Okay. And all my best. And I know it's scary, right? It's scary because, people you get all this misinformation, right? Trust your gut, right? Think about it, right? Learn about it. Trust your gut as to what you think. And I can just share with you my experience because I field patients who have come from everywhere else, right? And they've tried the detoxes. They've chased after mold. They chased after parasites. They chased after candida and detoxes and heavy metals and COVID and Epstein-Barr and all this stuff, right? And maybe they noticed a little bit of improvement, but everything comes right back. All they're doing is chasing after, they're chasing after kind of what's the last thing that's in that bucket, right? What we're going to do is fix the bucket. We'll pay a little attention to this stuff, right? But we're going to make the bucket bigger. You make the bucket bigger, no matter what is in there, that level is going to drop. Now you have tolerance, and now you can shift this physiology, right? Because you got to think about it like, okay, I've got mold, but everybody's exposed to mold. Why is it causing a problem in you and not somebody else? Same thing with candida. I've got candida. Well, everybody has candida. Literally, everybody has candida. It exists in our gut, right? It's a normal, natural inhabitant. It's not going to go anywhere, right? But why is it causing a problem in you and not somebody else? They're chasing after these secondary problems. Epstein-Barr, same thing. They used to do that for me, right? Oh, it must be your Epstein-Barr. Let's treat your Epstein-Barr. You know how many times I've treated Epstein-Barr? I'm embarrassed to even tell you. Once I started not ignoring it, but paying less attention to that and paying attention to, hey, why is my immune system not fighting off Epstein-Barr? Because my stress physiology is so off, deal with this adrenal problem. Now I don't have to chase Epstein-Barr anymore. I know this stuff is confusing, but it does make sense. You just got to think about it a certain way. Okay, so Catherine says, I was on your YouTube online, 2 minutes. It said to reach out. Case is complicated. Now crisis. I've got a cestoid infection, so tapeworm, right? Didn't know I had. Hospital. Loop device checking. So loop device checking the heart, checking blood sugar. Don't have an endo. November off steroids. Okay, so Catherine, it's going to be hard for me I can't obviously give you specific advice to deal with this because you're not in front of me. I don't know my history. It wouldn't be not only ethical, right? It wouldn't be effective, right? Because I don't know you, right? We don't have kind of a doctor-patient relationship at this point. But you definitely need care, and you need somebody who can look at it from this kind of broader perspective. I would give you the same advice as I would give Jess. I would suggest you reach out. Your situation is complex, and you need somebody who has experience to be able to look at this and kind of put it all into perspective and create a framework for you so that you can incrementally get ahead of this. Because these things they're all chasing after, again, these are you're vulnerable to a tapeworm because your immune system is suppressed because of this physiology. Like, so that's kind of what has to be dealt with. All right. Good luck. Alice says, how long does it take for blood sugar? Where are we? All right, we're right there. I'm going to do two more real quick. How long? Sorry. How long does it take for blood sugar regulation to go back to normal? It depends on what normal is. I mean, it takes months. But if you eat a hypoglycemic diet, right, and that's essential for anybody with adrenal problems, eat this hypoglycemic diet. That should help to normalize your blood sugar. How long does it take for you to be able to eat like a kind of a regular person and not suffer from that? I mean, it takes months, easily 6 to 12 months for the system to heal and for the adrenals to resume their kind of resiliency there. And Joe says, how important in the diet is eating every 2 to 3 hours? I fast a lot and feel like this is one of my main triggers to symptoms. Never fast. Anybody with adrenal problems should not fast. I don't care what anybody else says. You should not fast. I don't mind intermittent fasting for people without adrenal problems. But if you have an adrenal issue, you need to eat every 2 to 3 hours. You have to have small, frequent meals. Full stop. Full stop, Joe. Okay? Okay. Thanks for hanging in there. I know we're a couple minutes over time. If you have any questions or concerns, definitely reach out. Share our information. If you can, like us and do that kind of stuff you're supposed to do on social media. We are on there, and we're doing these to try to get the information out there about what adrenal fatigue is, because most people don't know. Like they think they just have anxiety, or they're just kind of tired, or they just can't sleep, or they just can't think, or they just have menopause or whatever. But there is possibly an underlying problem that is contributing to all that, right? So my hope with these with these Q&As is we can get that information out there to be able to assist, and reach out if you need any more information. Okay. All right. Good luck. All my best. Bye now.